The air in the offices of Vance and Sterling smelled the way money thinks it should, of old leather, lemon polish, and the phantom scent of rain on wool coats. It was an aroma I'd spent my entire adult life avoiding. Yet here I was, perched on the edge of a chair that was probably worth more than my car, feeling like a sparrow that had accidentally flown into a cathedral. Portraits of my ancestors, all stern-jawed men with the same cool, assessing Vance eyes, stared down from the paneled mahogany walls. My great-grandfather, a man who'd reportedly argued a case before the Supreme Court without notes. My grandfather's father, who had tripled the firm's endowment during the Great Depression. Their painted gazes felt heavier than judgment. They felt like a verdict already passed. I was a footnote in the family Bible, a biological fact they couldn't quite erase but could certainly ignore. Alara Vance, the archivist, the girl who preferred the quiet dust of the past to the polished, cutthroat present. My mother, Catherine, sat opposite me. She wasn't a Vance by blood, but she had assimilated with the fierce determination of an invasive species. Her posture was perfect, her pearls a soft white glow against the severe navy of her dress. Her gaze swept past me, landing on a microscopic smudge on the conference table as if it were a personal affront. My brother, Julian, sat beside her. The crown prince in his natural habitat. He was 2 years older, a decade more confident, and already a junior partner at the firm. He hadn't looked up from his phone since I'd arrived. A faint, bored smirk playing on his lips. He was probably closing a deal or swiping through a dating app. To Julian, the two activities required roughly the same amount of emotional investment. "We can begin," said Mr. Abernathy, the firm's most senior partner and the executor of my grandfather's will. He was a relic from a different era, a man whose quiet integrity felt out of place in this room. He'd always been kind to me. In a distant, pitying sort of way, he adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the funereal silence. "We are gathered to execute the final will and testament of Alistair James Vance, my grandfather, the only one who had ever looked at me and not seemed disappointed. The one who taught me the scent of old books was a kind of magic. That history whispered if you knew how to listen." His absence was a physical weight in the room, the only presence I actually missed. Mr. Abernathy began to read. The language was dense, full of legal jargon that was designed to be impenetrable. He dispensed with the minor bequests first. A collection of maritime paintings to a local museum, a generous donation to the Boston Public Library. My mother shifted in her seat, her patience wearing thin. "To my son, Robert Vance." Mr. Abernathy paused. My father had passed away 5 years prior, a fact the will acknowledged. "I leave my fondest memories of his childhood and the hope that he found peace." A cold, empty sentiment. Julian snorted softly, a little puff of derision. "To my daughter-in-law, Catherine Vance." Mr. Abernathy continued, looking at my mother. "I leave the porcelain tea set that once belonged to her grandmother, which I know she has long admired. May it serve her as well as her ambition." The compliment was so sharp it was an insult. Catherine's smile became a thin, brittle line. The tea set was a bauble. A dismissal. "To my grandson, Julian Vance." Julian finally looked up from his phone, a flicker of anticipation in his eyes. "I leave my collection of first edition law texts and my personal Rolex. He has always understood the value of appearances." Another poisoned gift. The air in the room grew tight. Julian's face, which was usually a mask of easy confidence, hardened into disbelief. He looked at my mother, who gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "And now, Mr. Abernathy said, his voice dropping slightly, "we come to the primary endowment, the residue of my estate, including all liquid assets, my properties including the brownstone on Beacon Hill, and my controlling shares in the firm of Vance and Sterling." This was it. The kingdom. Julian sat up straighter, his brief indignation forgotten, ready to receive his crown. My mother's expression was one of supreme confidence. This was the culmination of her life's work guiding her son to his rightful throne. Mr. Abernathy took a slow breath and looked directly at me. For the first time, I was the sole focus of everyone in the room. "I leave entirely and exclusively to my granddaughter, Ilara Catherine Vance." If silence had a sound, it was the shatter of my mother's composure. For a full 3 seconds, no one moved. It was as if the world had frozen. I saw it on their faces. Confusion, then denial, then a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. "What?" The word wasn't spoken. It was ripped from my mother's throat. "That's absurd," Julian snarled, standing up so fast his chair scraped violently against the floor. "It's a mistake." He was senile. She must have manipulated him. There's no other explanation. The will is perfectly sound. Julian. Mr. Abernathy said calmly, not flinching from his outburst. It was drafted 6 months ago. I witnessed it myself, as did 2 independent psychiatrists who confirmed Alistair was of exceptionally sound mind. He was, in his words, more lucid than he'd been in years. She doesn't know the first thing about this firm. She runs a dusty library archive. Julian's voice was rising, his face flushing a dangerous red. This was my birthright. Your grandfather. Mr. Abernathy said, his voice cutting through the anger like steel, believed the Vance legacy was not a birthright, but a responsibility. Which brings us to the final condition. He reached under the table and produced a small, ornate wooden box, about the size of a large book. It was dark cherry wood, inlaid with a simple brass compass rose. He slid it across the polished table toward me. It stopped directly in front of my trembling hands. The inheritance is not automatic, Alara, he said gently. Alistair was a man who loved history, who loved puzzles. He called this the Alistair Endowment. He stipulated that you must prove your merit, that you must demonstrate an understanding of the values he held dear, not just the value of his stock portfolio. My mother let out a strangled laugh. What is this? A scavenger hunt. This is a multi-million-dollar law firm, not a children's party. The terms are absolute. Mr. Abernathy stated, his gaze fixed on me. Inside that box is the first step on a path your grandfather laid out for you. The will gives you 1 year to complete it. If you succeed, everything is yours, unconditionally. If you refuse, or if you fail, he paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. Then the entirety of the estate, the shares, the properties, the money, all of it is to be liquidated and donated to the Historical Preservation Society of New England. He looked from my mother's horrified face to Julian's apoplectic one. He has, in effect, created a situation where if Alara does not inherit, no one does. I stared at the box. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A wild bird in a cage. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a challenge. A dare. My grandfather hadn't just left me his fortune, he had left me a test, a shield, and a weapon, all in one. And as I looked at the fury twisting the faces of my mother and brother, I understood. This was never about the money. It was about who was worthy of the story. For a moment, the 3 of us, Mother, son, and Ghost remained frozen in a tableau of shock and fury. Julian's hands were clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles white. My mother's face was a mask of elegant horror, as if she'd just witnessed a waiter spill wine on a priceless tapestry. It was she who recovered first, her voice dropping into a tone of saccharine, venomous concern. Alara, darling, she cooed, taking a step toward me. You can't possibly comprehend what this entails. The pressures, the decisions, it's not a game. Let Julian and me guide you. We can handle this. For you. For you meant for us. It meant let us take control, push you back into your dusty corner, and carry on as if this bizarre interruption never happened. She'll run the firm into the ground in a week. Julian spat, his voice thick with contempt. He turned his glare on me. You'll be a laughingstock. You'll drag the Vance name through the mud and lose everything for all of us because of some sentimental old fool's fantasy? Something inside me, a piece of quiet compliance that had been my lifelong companion, finally snapped. I stood, my movements feeling slow and deliberate in the superheated air of the room. My hand closed around the cherry wood box. It was cool and solid. An anchor in the storm? I looked past my mother, past my brother, and met Mr. Abernathy's gaze. Thank you, Mr. Abernathy, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I will be in touch. I turned and walked toward the door. Each click of my sensible heels on the marble floor sounded like a declaration. Alara, you will not walk out that door, my mother commanded, her voice regaining its familiar iron authority. I didn't break my stride. I didn't look back. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped out into the hallway, leaving the sound of my brother shouting my name to be swallowed by the closing door. I didn't go home to my small apartment in Cambridge, a place that suddenly felt like it belonged to a different person. Instead, I directed the cab to the one place in Boston I felt truly safe, a place my grandfather and I had considered a shared sanctuary, the Boston Athenaeum. It was a private library, a grand, hushed institution tucked away on Beacon Street. It smelled of aged paper, beeswax, and quiet contemplation. I found an empty carrel in the back of the 5th floor reading room, a small wooden nook overlooking the granary burying ground. The dead outside seemed more peaceful than the living I'd just left behind. With trembling fingers, I placed the box on the desk. For a long moment, I just stared at the brass compass rose inlaid in the lid. It wasn't pointing north. It was pointing toward me. Taking a deep breath, I lifted the lid. There was no note, no map. The interior was lined with deep blue velvet, and it held only 2 items. The first was an old, tarnished silver key. It was ornate, with a head shaped like a stylized V for Vance. It was heavy. Real. The second was a small, custom-bound book. It was covered in soft, dark brown leather and was completely blank, with no title on the spine. I opened it. On the first page, in my grandfather's familiar, elegant script, was a single quote. "To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." Beneath the quote, he had added a short, personal message. "My dearest Alara, he lived just a stone's throw from our history. But which one? Find the lock this key was made for. Alistair." I read it 3 times. My mind, trained to find patterns in history and order in chaos, began to work. The quote was from Ralph Waldo Emerson. An easy one. My grandfather and I had often discussed the transcendentalists. Emerson was the quintessential New England intellectual, a cornerstone of the very culture my family claimed to champion. The second part was the real puzzle. He lived just a stone's throw from our history. But which one? Emerson lived in Concord. That was common knowledge. But what did he mean by our history? The Vance family history. The law firm was in Boston. The brownstone was in Boston. Our family plot was in Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge. None of that was a stone's throw from Concord. I closed my eyes, picturing the maps I knew so well. Concord. Lexington. Boston. The cradle of the American Revolution. Our history. Not just the Vance history, but our history as Americans. The phrase was a double entendre. But which one? My mind raced. What did the Vances have in Concord? I had no memory of a family home there. But Alistair was a historian at heart. He believed family history was intertwined with the nation's. I pulled out my phone and accessed the private digital archives of the firm, a database I had helped design years ago at my grandfather's request. I typed in the search term Vance, Concord. Dozens of legal documents appeared. Deeds, trusts, land sales. Most were client-related. I narrowed the search by date, going back to the 19th century. And then I saw it, an address. 255 Lexington Road. I knew that road. It was the main route through Concord. The path the British took. It was lined with historic houses. I cross-referenced the address with a historical property map. My breath caught in my throat. The property at 255 Lexington Road was directly adjacent to the old manse, the very home where Emerson had lived and written nature. He had literally lived a stone's throw away from it. But who owned it? I clicked on the most recent deed, dated just 1 year ago. The property, a small, unassuming historic cottage and a plot of land, had been purchased not by an individual, but by a blind trust. The name of the trust was the Trillium Endowment. Trillium, a 3-petaled flower. My grandfather's favorite. The same flower he had pressed inside a copy of Walden he'd given me for my 16th birthday. It was a place he'd kept secret, a piece of our history, hidden in plain sight, right next to a giant of American history. The lock the key was made for wasn't in a bank. It wasn't in an office. It was waiting for me in a quiet cottage in Concord. I packed the book and key carefully back into the box. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. "He's not the only one who can make a puzzle. Be careful whose history you go digging up." A cold dread washed over me, sharp and immediate. They weren't going to just sit back and watch me win. They were going to play the game. 2. The drive from Boston to Concord took less than an hour, but it felt like crossing a border into another country. The city's dense, competitive energy receded in my rearview mirror, replaced by the quiet, tree-lined roads of the suburbs with every mile. However, the anonymous text message felt like a weight in my pocket. I kept checking my mirror, my senses on high alert, half expecting to see Julian's sleek black sedan tailing me. But there was nothing. Only ordinary cars carrying ordinary people. The threat was invisible, which somehow made it worse. I found 255 Lexington Road without any trouble. It was exactly as I'd pictured it. A modest, gray-shingled cottage, the kind tourists might pass without a second glance. It sat under the shade of an ancient oak tree, looking humble and timeless. It was a perfect hiding place, cloaked in insignificance. I parked on the street and walked up the short gravel path. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. For a moment, I hesitated. The silver key cold in my palm, this was the point of no return. Taking a steadying breath, I slid the key into the old brass lock on the front door. It resisted for a second, then turned with a satisfying, resonant click. The door opened into a large room that stole my breath away. It wasn't a cottage, it was a sanctuary. Bookshelves lined every wall, floor to ceiling, crammed not with law books, but but with history, philosophy, and poetry. Old maps, their paper yellowed with age, were framed and hung between the shelves. In the center of the room sat a single, massive oak desk, cleared of everything except for one leather-bound book. A worn leather armchair was angled toward a stone fireplace, as if its occupant had just stepped out for a moment. The entire room smelled of pipe tobacco, old paper, and my grandfather. A wave of grief, sharp and profound, washed over me. This was his true home. This was the man I knew. Far from the suffocating world of Vance and Sterling, this was the legacy he wanted me to understand. I walked to the desk. The book waiting for me was, as I'd suspected, a beautiful edition of Thoreau's Walden. It wasn't a signal, it was an invitation. I sat in his chair, the leather sighing under my weight, and opened it. There was no note tucked inside. I began to leaf through the pages, my archivist's instincts taking over. I was looking for an anomaly, a dog-eared page, a faint pencil mark, a pressed flower. I found it in the chapter titled, Where I Lived, and What I Lived For. A single passage was faintly underlined in pencil, so lightly it was almost invisible. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear, nor did I wish to practice resignation, unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life. The clue wasn't in the words themselves, but in the intent to front only the essential facts. My grandfather wasn't sentimental, he was deliberate. The passage wasn't the puzzle, it was the key to finding it. My gaze swept the room again, this time with purpose. What was the most essential fact? In this room, the maps. I stood and approached the largest one, a detailed surveyor's map of Concord from the 1850s. It was a beautiful piece of cartography, every pond, river, and road hand-drawn. I scanned the map, my eyes searching for a connection to the passage. Marrow, the word stuck in my head. Not a common word in cartography. I traced the route of the Sudbury River, then my fingers stopped. Tucked away near the riverbank was a small, almost faded-out plot of land labeled the Marrow Fields, an old, forgotten local name. My heart began to beat faster. I ran my fingers lightly over the spot on the map. Beneath the glass of the frame, I felt a slight give. A tiny, almost imperceptible depression in the map's surface. Holding my breath, I pressed it firmly. With a soft snick, a section of the bookshelf beside the map swung inward, revealing a dark, hidden compartment. Inside the secret alcove sat 2 items. The first was a small, heavy brass object, an antique sextant, an instrument for navigation. Tucked beside it was another leather-bound book, smaller this time. A ledger. I took the ledger out first. It wasn't old. The entries were dated over the last 7 years. The first page had a simple title in my grandfather's hand, The Julian Problem. I sank onto the floor, my back against the bookshelf, and began to read. It was a meticulous record of my brother's professional life, a shadow accounting of his career. It detailed how Julian had mismanaged a trust fund belonging to an elderly widow, siphoning off nearly $100,000 before Alistair had discovered it and quietly replaced the funds from his own pocket. It documented a real estate deal where Julian had used insider information to benefit a friend. A clear ethics violation. It was a catalog of arrogance and corruption, each entry supported by copies of bank statements, emails, and internal memos that my grandfather had somehow collected. He hadn't just been covering for Julian. He had been building a case against him. This wasn't a game. This was an arsenal. My grandfather knew my brother would be my greatest obstacle, and he had left me the weapons I would need to fight him. He was teaching me to be a Vance, but on his terms, not by ignoring the ugly truths, but by confronting them. The second item, the sextant, now made sense. It was a tool for charting a course. I picked it up. Tied to it with a piece of twine was a small, rolled-up piece of parchment. I untied it. The note was short. The law shows you where you stand. A legacy shows you where to go. Chart your own course. The name you seek is the one they tried to bury. The name they tried to bury. What did that mean? Another person? A secret. Before I could process the new clue, a sound from outside shattered the silence. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. A car door slamming shut with expensive, heavy finality. My blood ran cold. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the ledger to my chest. I rushed to the window, peering through the edge of the curtain. A sleek black sedan was parked behind my own modest car. The driver's side door was open, and stepping out of it, his face a mask of cold fury, was my brother, Julian. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me for a single, paralyzing second. Julian was here. He had found me. My sanctuary was breached. Then another instinct took over, colder and sharper than the fear. It was the archivist's instinct. Preserve the record. The ledger was everything. I couldn't let him find it. My eyes darted around the room. The hidden compartment was the only place. With frantic, silent movements, I shoved the ledger back into the dark alcove, slid the bookshelf panel shut, and prayed it looked undisturbed. I snatched the sextant and the small parchment note, shoving them deep into my coat pocket just as heavy. Furious footsteps hit the porch. The doorknob rattled violently. Elara. I know you're in there, Julian's voice boomed, muffled by the thick oak door. Open this door right now, or I swear I will break it down. Don't test me. I backed away from the door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I pressed myself against the far wall, trying to melt into the shadows of the bookshelves. The rattling stopped. A heavy thud shook the entire cottage as he threw his shoulder against the door. Then another. A louder crack! With a splintering groan, the door frame gave way and the door flew open. Julian stood there, breathing heavily, his suit jacket disheveled, his face a mask of triumphant rage. He looked like a wolf that had finally cornered its prey. His eyes swept the room, the books, the desk, the fireplace, a look of disgust curling his lip. What a pathetic little hideaway, he sneered, stepping inside. This has grandfather's sentimental stench all over it. So, this is the first stop on your magical mystery tour. What did he leave you? A poem, a pressed flower. I remained silent, my back pressed to the wall, trying to control my breathing. My silence only seemed to fuel his anger. Don't play dumb with me. Elara, I got a notification from the estate's security account. A property tax alert for a trust I've never heard of. It wasn't hard to follow the breadcrumbs from there. Now, give me whatever clue you found. This game is over. It's not a game. Julian, I said, my voice quiet but clear. Oh, spare me the righteous act, he laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. He took another step toward me, his posture menacing. You think you're worthy of his legacy? You, who hides from the world in a library basement. I have built this firm with my own 2 hands for the last 10 years. You've built your career on secrets and theft. I shot back, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. His smirk vanished. What did you say? This was it, the precipice. I had to choose my words carefully. I couldn't reveal the ledger. Not yet, but I could show him I had a blade of my own, I said. I repeated, holding his gaze, that you're very good at making things disappear. Things that don't belong to you. Isn't that right? You should ask Mrs. Albright about her trust fund. I'm sure she'd be interested to know about your unique approach to accounting. The color drained from Julian's face. For the first time in his life, I saw genuine fear in my brother's eyes. It was quickly replaced by a terrifying, wild fury. The pretense was gone. This was no longer about the firm. It was about exposure. What else? He whispered, his voice dangerously low. What else did that old man leave you? He lunged. He grabbed my coat, slamming me back against the bookshelf. The impact knocked the wind out of me, books rattling on the shelves around me. Where is it? Elara. Show me. His hand searched my pockets, but I twisted away. He was stronger, but I was desperate. My eyes scanned the room for a weapon, for an escape. The fireplace poker? Too far. Then I saw it. Tucked behind the curtain of the side window was a small, simple brass bolt, a second exit. Grandfather, ever the strategist, had built a way out. Julian grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh. You are going to regret this. No? I gasped, wrenching my arm free with a surge of adrenaline. You are... While his eyes were blinded by rage, mine were clear. As he lunged for me again, I sidestepped and shoved the heavy leather armchair into his path. He stumbled, cursing, giving me the 2 seconds I needed. I scrambled to the side window, my fingers fumbling with the brass bolt. It was stiff. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was rusted shut. Julian recovered, his face murderous. He was coming, with a final, desperate tug. The bolt slid free. I threw open the small door. It led directly outside into the overgrown woods behind the cottage and scrambled through. You can't run forever, he roared from inside. I didn't look back. I plunged into the woods, branches scratching at my face and arms. My car was blocked by his. I couldn't go to the road, so I ran deeper into the trees, following the faint whisper of the river, my feet sinking into the soft, damp earth. I ran until my lungs burned and the sounds of my brother's rage faded into the chirping of birds. I finally collapsed at the base of a large pine tree, gasping for air, shaking uncontrollably. I was safe. For now, the ledger was safe. He hadn't found it. I had survived the confrontation. But as I sat there, the cold reality sank in. This was how far he would go. He would hurt me. He would do anything to protect his secrets. My hand went to my pocket, and my fingers closed around the sextant. I pulled out the parchment note and read it again. The law shows you where you stand. A legacy shows you where to go. Chart your own course. The name you seek is the one they tried to bury. They, not just Julian. They, my mother, maybe others. A name they tried to bury. This wasn't just about Julian's crimes anymore. This was bigger. This was the heart of the puzzle. My grandfather hadn't just left me weapons to fight my brother. He had left me a map to find a truth my entire family had conspired to erase. I stood up, my body aching but my mind clear and cold as ice. I couldn't go back to the cottage. Not yet. I couldn't go to the police. They would see a family squabble. Not a conspiracy. I needed an ally. Someone my grandfather trusted. Someone outside the family. My mind raced through the names from the firm. Mr. Abernathy was kind, but he was a creature of the system. A system my family controlled. I needed someone else. My fingers traced the V on the key in my other pocket. A memory sparked. A name from years ago. A woman who had worked as my grandfather's private paralegal. Someone who had retired abruptly after a disagreement with my mother. A woman he had always called his true north. Her name was Melba. Melba Thorne. I didn't know if I could find her, but I had to try. Chart my own course. It was the only way forward. The woods of Concord eventually gave way to a quiet residential street. I emerged from the tree line feeling like a soldier returning from a forgotten war, mud-streaked, heartsore, and irrevocably changed. I didn't dare use a ride-sharing app that could be traced to my name. Instead, I walked to the town center and paid cash for a commuter rail ticket to Porter Square in Cambridge, a place teeming with enough students and anonymous faces for me to disappear. In a noisy coffee shop, surrounded by the clatter of ceramic mugs and the earnest chatter of university students, I finally allowed myself to think. Julian knew about the cottage. I couldn't go back there. Not yet. The ledger, my only concrete proof, was both safe and inaccessible. I was a fugitive in my own life. I pulled the sextant from my pocket. It was heavy, a beautiful piece of brass and polished glass. My grandfather had taught me how to use one on the deck of his sailboat, explaining how sailors for centuries had found their way by looking at the stars. Chart your own course. The clue was both a metaphor and, I suspected, a literal instruction. I examined the instrument with an archivist's eye. It wasn't the brand that mattered. It was the unique identifiers. On the brass arc, almost hidden in the patina of age, was a small, engraved plate. It wasn't a serial number. It was a string of characters separated by periods. BPL? Rare. MS? 1138? My breath caught. It was a library accession number. BPL for Boston Public Library. Rare for the Rare Books and Manuscripts Collection. MSS for Manuscript. It was a call number. A breadcrumb only I, the family archivist, would immediately recognize. My grandfather hadn't just left me a puzzle. He had spoken to me in my own language. My fingers flew across my phone's keyboard. Navigating to the BPL's online archives, I typed the accession number into the search field. The result popped up instantly. It was a collection titled The Thorne Maritime Papers, 1880 to 1920, a collection of legal documents, shipping manifests, and correspondence from a 19th century shipping magnate. The donor, listed on the collection's record page, was a Miss Melba Thorne. The donation had been made 5 years ago, the same year she had retired from Vance and Sterling. There was no address, but there was a point of contact, a post office box in Rockport, a small, rocky fishing town on the coast. True north. He had meant it literally. An hour later, I was on another train, heading north along the coast. Rockport was a town defined by granite and sea. I found the post office and, using $100 from the emergency cash in my wallet, persuaded a reluctant clerk to pass along a message for the owner of the box. I wrote a simple note on a piece of paper. I have the sextant. He said you were his true north. I need to talk. Alara. I didn't know if it would work, but it was all I had. I spent the next 2 hours sitting on a granite bench overlooking the harbor, watching the lobster boats bob in the gray water, just as the cold was beginning to seep into my bones. My phone, the one with the anonymous SIM card, rang. Who is this? A woman's voice asked. It was crisp, cautious, and without preamble. My name is Alara Vance. A pause. Why did you contact me? Because my grandfather, Alistair, left me a path to follow, and I believe it was meant to lead me to you. I took a chance. He called you his true north. The silence on the other end of Theline was long and heavy. Finally, the woman spoke again, her voice softer now, tinged with something I couldn't quite identify, sadness. Perhaps. Stay on that bench. A blue sedan. 5 minutes? The car pulled up exactly 5 minutes later. The woman behind the wheel was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver hair cut in a practical, no-nonsense style. She was Melba Thorne. She looked at me, her gaze taking in my disheveled appearance, and simply nodded toward the passenger seat. We drove in silence to a small, immaculate house overlooking the ocean. Inside, she made 2 cups of tea, her movements efficient and precise. She handed one to me and sat in an armchair opposite me. Alistair was a brilliant man, she began, but he was also a sentimentalist. Tell me everything. And so I did. The will reading, the box, the cottage, the ledger. I told her about Julian's attack, the fear, the escape. I finished by pulling out the small parchment note and handing it to her. She read the words aloud, her voice barely a whisper. The name you seek is the one they tried to bury. She closed her eyes. A look of immense pain and sorrow crossed her face. When she opened them again, they were filled with a fierce, protective light. He finally did it, she murmured. He finally armed someone to unearth the truth. What truth? Melba? What name? She took a deep breath. This isn't about Julian's petty crimes. Alara, that ledger is just a weapon. The real battle is about a sin so old it has poisoned the roots of your family tree. It's not just a name, it's a person. Who? I pressed, leaning forward. Alistair had an older sister, Melba said, her voice dropping. Her name was Rosemary Vance. She was born in 1938. You will not find her name on any family tree, in any legal document, or on any census record. Because when she was 5 years old, it became clear she was different. Not in a way the proud, perfect Vances could tolerate. I believe she was on what we would now call the autism spectrum. But back then, she was just labeled deficient. The word landed like a stone in the quiet room. Your great-grandparents, with the full support of Alistair's father, made a decision. To protect the family's reputation, they had her institutionalized. Then they erased her. They systematically destroyed every photograph, every letter, every record of her birth. They told the world she had died of pneumonia as a child. They buried her alive under a mountain of lies. I felt sick. Alistair, he was part of this. He was just a boy, Melba said softly. He was told his sister was gone. It was only decades later, after his father died, that he found a hidden box of his mother's letters and discovered the truth. He was haunted by it for the rest of his life. He tried to find her, but the institution had closed. The records lost in a fire. It was his greatest failure. So the puzzle, the inheritance, it was never just for you. Melba finished. It was for her, or for her legacy. Alistair's final mission for you isn't just to claim your inheritance. It's to find out what happened to Rosemary Vance, to give her back the name they stole. My mind reeled. This was so much bigger than a law firm. This was about restoring a stolen life. But if the records are gone, how do I find her? I asked, my voice trembling. Melba stood and walked to a locked filing cabinet in the corner. She unlocked it and pulled out a single, thin file. Alistair spent years looking. He found one thing, one last loose thread. Rosemary didn't die in that institution. She lived there until she was 18. And just before she was released, she had a child, a daughter. She slid a faded, photocopied document across the table. It was a birth certificate from 1956. The mother's name was listed as Rosemary. The father's name was blank. The child's name was listed as Baby Girl Doe. The baby was immediately placed in a closed adoption through a church in Boston. Melba said, your family, your great-grandparents, and your mother, Catherine, who eventually learned the secret and helped keep it buried, made sure the records were sealed so tightly no one could ever open them. A lost heir. A cousin I never knew existed. Alistair believed that child. That woman is still alive. Melba said, finding her, righting that wrong. That is the legacy he wanted you to fight for. The sextant isn't just a clue, Alara. It's your new compass, and I will help you follow it. The sea air outside Melba's house felt sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the murky, 70-year-old secret now swirling between us. We sat at her kitchen table, the faded birth certificate lying under the lamplight like a sacred text. The path forward was clear, but treacherous. A closed adoption from 1956 is a legal fortress, Melba said, her voice practical, pulling me from my reverie. Petitioning the court to open the records would take years. And the moment we file, Catherine and Julian will know exactly what we're looking for. They'll bury us in legal motions. We can't use the front door, so we go through the side window, I responded, my mind already shifting into archivist mode. The birth certificate doesn't name the hospital, but most Catholic adoptions in Boston back then went through one place. St. Helena's Foundling Home, closed in the 70s, Melba countered. Its records were absorbed by the Archdiocese, which means they're sitting in an archive, I said, a flicker of determination cutting through my shock. It's a place I know how to navigate. Our first move was tactical. I abandoned my car in a long-term garage, and Melba and I began using her unassuming sedan. We checked into a small, anonymous motel halfway between her house and the city. I was officially off the grid for the next 2 days. We became historical researchers at the Archdiocese of Boston's archives, a cavernous, climate-controlled room that smelled of aging paper. We presented ourselves as academics studying the social work of post-war Catholic charities. No one questioned us. We were given access to dozens of boxes of administrative records from St. Helena's. It was painstaking, soul-crushing work. We examined ledger after ledger of admissions, discharges, and donations. Every entry was a ghost, a brief, sterile summary of a life in crisis. But there was no mention of a Rosemary Vance or a baby girl Doe in the autumn of 1956. The records for that entire period were pristine, professional, and utterly unhelpful. "They've been scrubbed," I whispered to Melba at the end of the second day, my eyes sore from deciphering faded cursive. Someone, years ago, went through these official records and removed any trace. It was on the third morning that the Vance family began their counterattack. I tried to buy our coffee and pastries at a local cafe, and my debit card was declined. I tried my credit card. Also declined. A quick check on my phone showed my personal bank accounts had been frozen. An email from Mr. Abernathy provided the curt explanation. As executor, and in light of the ongoing uncertainty regarding the estate, we have placed a temporary hold on all assets tied to your name to ensure their preservation. "It's Catherine's move," Melba said grimly as she paid for our breakfast with her own card. "She's cutting off your resources, trying to make you helpless and dependent." The second attack came that afternoon. Melba's phone buzzed with a news alert from a Boston Society blog. The headline read, "Vance family turmoil. Grieving family beset by unstable relative." The article, quoting an anonymous source close to the family, painted a picture of a distinguished family being harassed by a reclusive and emotionally volatile granddaughter who is making outlandish claims about their beloved patriarch's final wishes. It was accompanied by a recent photo of Catherine and Julian, arms linked, looking somber and dignified. They weren't just trying to stop me. They were publicly assassinating my character, discrediting me before I could ever speak a word of the truth. Defeated and frustrated, we returned to our motel room. "They're building a narrative," I said, staring at the picture of my mother's perfectly feigned grief. "By the time we find anything, no one will believe us." "They sanitize the official story because that's all they care about," Melba said, her eyes fixed on the far wall. "So we stopped looking at the official story." She turned to me, a new spark of urgency in her eyes. "Alistair once told me that history isn't written in ledgers, it's written in diaries. When he was searching for Rosemary, he hit the same wall we did, but he found a name. Sister Agnes. She was the head nurse at St. Helena's, a woman known for her kindness. She died in the 1990s, but she was a diarist. The next morning, we weren't at the Grand Archdiocesan Archive. We were at the much smaller, slightly dusty archive of the Sisters of Charity Convent. We found Sister Agnes's life packed into 3 cardboard boxes. After 2 hours of sifting through old photographs and correspondence, I found it. A small, cloth-bound diary for the year 1956. My hands trembled as I opened it. Her entries were short. Observations about faith, weather, and her work. I scanned the pages for September, then October, and then I stopped. October 12th, 1956. A new baby girl came to us today. A beautiful, healthy child. Her mother is the sad, lovely girl from the state hospital. My heart aches for her. She held the baby just once, a look on her face I will never forget. There is no father listed. The poor child is a ward of the state, another soul to pray for. My breath hitched. I kept reading. October 28th, 1956. A blessing today. The baby girl, whom I have been calling Angelina in my prayers, was placed for adoption. A good, childless couple from the North End. They have been trying for a child for 10 years. The father is a baker, a kind man with flour under his fingernails. I pray she will have a life full of love and warmth and fresh bread. They are a good family. The Petrillos. Petrillo. We had a name, a profession, a neighborhood. It was more than a clue. It was a beacon. A wave of triumph washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. We had found the first step on the path to the lost heir, as we practically ran out of the convent. My burner phone rang. It was Mr. Abernathy. His voice was stiff and formal, devoid of any of the kindness he'd once shown me. "Alara," he said, "this call is to officially inform you that given your recent documented erratic behavior and your refusal to cooperate with the estate. Mrs. Catherine Vance and Mr. Julian Vance are petitioning the Suffolk Probate Court for an emergency hearing. They are seeking to have you declared mentally incompetent to fulfill the conditions of your grandfather's will, and are requesting a temporary guardianship be appointed to oversee the endowment. The line went dead. The victory of finding the name Petrillo evaporated, replaced by the cold, terrifying reality of the new attack. They weren't just trying to smear my name in the press. They were trying to legally erase me. Mr. Abernathy's words hung in the air like poison. Mentally incompetent. It was a brilliant, vicious move. They weren't just trying to take the inheritance. They were trying to take my name, my credibility, my very identity. Back in the motel room, panic began to set in. A cold, creeping tide. Melba, however, was a rock. She took one look at my face, put the kettle on, and sat me down at the small table. "This is a classic Julian and Catherine maneuver," she said, her voice a low, steady hum. "They can't win on facts, so they attack the person. An emergency competency hearing is fast. We'll have 48, maybe 72 hours at most before we have to appear in front of a judge. They'll paint you as delusional, unstable. Our only defense is to walk into that courtroom with the truth. We don't have time for caution anymore. We have to find her." Now, the fear receded, replaced by a white-hot urgency. Melba was right. This was the final round. We drove into Boston before dawn. Our first stop was not an archive, but the Boston City Hall, home to the city's municipal records. We needed to find a baker named Petrillo, living in the North End in 1956. We started with business licenses. Under the fluorescent lights of the records room, we scrolled through reels of microfilm, the images blurry and faint. Then, I found it. A license issued in 1948 for Petrillo's Fine Breads and Pastries at an address on Hanover Street. The owner was listed as Antonio Petrillo. "We have him," I whispered to Melba. From there, the pieces fell into place with the satisfying click of a puzzle being solved. We cross-referenced the name with census records. The 1960 census showed Antonio and Sophia Petrillo living above the bakery, and listed in their household was a daughter, age 4. Her name was Angela. Angela. Sister Agnes's Angelina. My heart hammered in my chest. She was real. She had a name. The next step was to bridge the gap from 1960 to the present day. We moved to the probate court records, searching for wills or property deeds. We found Sophia Petrillo's death certificate, dated 2 years ago. The informant, the person who reported the death, was listed as her daughter, Angela Rossi. A marriage certificate from 1978 showed Angela Petrillo had married a man named David Rossi. The death certificate listed Angela Rossi's current address, a small house in Medford, a quiet suburb just north of the city. We had her! We had found the lost heir. The drive to Medford was the quietest of my life. What do you say to a woman who is about to have her entire history rewritten? How do you deliver news that will shatter her world? The house was a modest, tidy brick home with a small, well-tended garden in the front. Melba stayed in the car, a silent pillar of support. This was my journey to finish. I walked up the pathway and rang the bell. My hand was shaking. The door opened, and a woman in her late 60s with kind, curious eyes looked out at me. She had a warm, gentle face, but her cheekbones, the set of her eyes, it was like looking at a softer, happier echo of the stern Vance portraits. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Mrs. Rossi," I began, my voice unsteady. "My name is Alara Vance. I know this is going to sound strange, but I'm a historian, and I'm researching families from the North End. I believe our histories might be connected. I was hoping to ask you about your father, Mr. Petrillo." Her expression softened at the mention of her father. "My father, he's been gone many years." "What about him?" "I'm researching a specific institution. St. Helena's Foundling Home." I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a subtle shift. She knew. She knew she was adopted. "And I believe," I continued, my voice dropping, "that my grandfather knew your birth mother. Her name was Rosemary." The woman, Angela, stared at me, her face pale. The name clearly meant nothing to her, but the context. St. Helena's had landed. She unlatched the screen door. You should come inside," she said. I sat in her comfortable, sunlit living room, filled with family photos of children and grandchildren. A life well lived. I told her the story as gently as I could. I told her about the Vances, a powerful Boston family. I told her about a young woman named Rosemary, hidden away. I told her about my grandfather, Alistair, and his lifelong search. I didn't mention the inheritance or the money. I just told her the story of a lost sister. She listened, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. I always knew I was adopted, she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. My parents, my real parents, Antonio and Sophia, they told me when I was young. They said my birth mother was a young girl who couldn't care for me, and that she wanted me to have a good life. They never knew her name. Her name was Rosemary Vance, I said softly, and she was my great aunt. Angela looked at me, her eyes filled with a lifetime of unanswered questions. It's a lot to take in. It sounds like a fairy tale. Why would this powerful family hide her away? Because they were more concerned with appearances than with people, I said. She shook her head slowly, trying to absorb it all. My mother. Sophia, just before she passed, she gave me a box, a small jewelry box. She said my birth mother had left it for me at the home. She told me, you may never need this, Angela. Your life is here with us. But if anyone ever comes to you with a story about the past, this box holds the first chapter. I've never opened it. She left the room and returned with a small, velvet-covered box with trembling hands. She opened the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded cotton, was a small, silver locket, tarnished with age. Angela picked it up and managed to open the delicate clasp. Inside were two tiny, oval frames. One side was empty. The other held a miniature, faded photograph of a young woman with large, sad eyes. It was a face I'd never seen, but I knew, with absolute certainty, it was Rosemary. Angela carefully prized the photo out. On the back of the locket, scratched into the silver with a pin, was a single, elegant initial, for Alistair. He had found a way to leave his sister a final gift, a piece of himself, and it had made its way to her daughter. It was the proof, an undeniable, emotional link tying this baker's daughter from Medford to the Vance dynasty of Beacon Hill. My phone buzzed, a harsh, unwelcome sound in the sacred silence of the room. A calendar alert. Emergency competency hearing. Suffolk Probate Court. Tomorrow, 10:00 a.m. We had found the truth. Now, we had less than 24 hours to make anyone believe it. The 24 hours that followed were a blur of frantic energy and quiet determination. Angela, holding the locket that connected her to a ghost, looked at me, her eyes full of a strength I was only just beginning to recognize in myself. My parents, the Petrillos, they were good, honest people, she said softly. They would want the truth to be told. I'll go with you. That night, Melba earned her title as True North. She made a call to a lawyer she trusted, a sharp, semi-retired litigator named Iris Chang who had a reputation for fighting Goliaths and winning. We met Iris at her small office, working late into the night under the glow of fluorescent lights. We laid out the entire story. The will, the puzzles, the ledger, and our newfound heir. Angela. Iris listened, her expression unreadable. When we finished, she tapped a pen on her legal pad. They're not trying to prove you're incompetent, Ilara, she said, her voice sharp. They're trying to bury you under a legal procedure so fast you can't fight back. So we don't defend. We attack. We turn their petition into a stage for the truth. The next morning, as we walked up the steps of the Suffolk Probate Court, I felt a strange calm. I was no longer the frightened sparrow who had entered the offices of Vance and Sterling. Beside me walked Melba, my loyal strategist, and Angela, the living embodiment of the secret they had tried to erase. We were a united front. Inside, the courtroom was cold and intimidating. Catherine and Julian were already seated with their lawyer, looking supremely confident. My mother shot me a look of pure loathing. Julian simply looked bored, as if this were a tedious but necessary piece of administrative work. When they saw Angela sitting with us, a flicker of confusion crossed their faces before they dismissed her as irrelevant. The hearing began swiftly. Their lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Harrington, laid out their case. He painted me as a disturbed and unstable recluse, citing my sudden disappearance and lack of communication. He presented my frozen bank accounts as a necessary precaution. He called my quest a childish fantasy and argued that a guardian implicitly, Julian, was needed to protect the venerable Vance estate. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Miller, looked at the paperwork with a weary expression. It seemed like a straightforward, if sad, family dispute. Ms. Chang, the judge said, turning to our table. Your response. Iris stood, her presence calm and commanding. Your Honor, my client's behavior has not been erratic. It has been an investigation, a necessary investigation into a conspiracy of fraud and concealment perpetrated by the petitioners themselves, for which this petition is the latest desperate act. A murmur went through the courtroom. Harrington jumped to his feet. Objection. This is baseless slander. Then you won't object to me providing the basis for it, Iris retorted smoothly. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, the petitioners claim my client is delusional. We are here to present the reality she has uncovered. Over the next hour, Iris systematically dismantled their case. She presented the timeline of my investigation, showing my actions were logical and methodical. She submitted the research from the archives, and the birth certificate of baby girl Doe, and the entry from Sister Agnes's diary. With each piece of evidence, I saw Julian's composure begin to crack. My mother sat rigid as a statue, her face pale. This proves nothing, Harrington sputtered. It's just a sad story. A coincidence? Then allow me to call my only witness to the stand, Iris said. Mrs. Angela Rossi. Angela walked to the witness stand, her movements graceful and composed. She told her story simply and without embellishment, her happy childhood with the Petrillos, the knowledge that she was adopted, and the day I had appeared at her door. Then, Iris asked her to identify the locket. It was left for me by my birth mother, Angela said, her voice clear and strong. My mother, Sophia Petrillo, gave it to me. Inside is a picture of the young woman I now know was Rosemary Vance. She held it up, and on the back is the initial A for the uncle I never knew I had, Alistair Vance. At that moment, the final piece of Catherine's perfect facade shattered. She let out a small, strangled gasp. Your Honor, Iris said, turning to the judge. This is the fantasy my client was chasing. A living, breathing person whose existence the Vance family has spent 70 years trying to deny. Then came the final blow. Furthermore, Iris continued, we have reason to believe this petition was filed in bad faith for another reason. To stop my client from discovering this, she held up a single sheet of paper, a sworn affidavit stating the location of a ledger, detailing years of financial misconduct and potential felonies committed by Mr. Julian Vance in his capacity at the firm misconduct his grandfather was documenting. The attacks on my client were not to protect the estate. They were to protect Mr. Vance from prison. Julian shot to his feet, his face white with fury and panic. Lies. This is all lies. That will be enough. Mr. Vance, Judge Miller boomed, her voice like thunder. Her weary expression was gone, replaced by cold, hard anger. She looked at Catherine and Julian, and for the first time, I saw them for what they were. Small, frightened people, stripped of their power. I've heard enough, the judge declared. The petition to declare Mrs. Elara Vance incompetent is not only dismissed, it is an insult to this court's intelligence. It is a malicious, frivolous action brought in bad faith. I am fining the petitioners for contempt and opening a formal inquiry into the allegations of financial misconduct and potential perjury. She looked directly at me and Angela. The court recognizes the legitimacy of your search. Ms. Vance, you are free to continue fulfilling the terms of your grandfather's will. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel fell like a death sentence on my family's pride. Outside, on the courthouse steps, we were met by a throng of reporters. Catherine and Julian, their faces ashen, pushed through the crowd without a word. One reporter shoved a microphone in my face. Ms. Vance, after all this, do you have anything to say to your family? I stood there for a moment, with Melba on one side and Angela on the other. I looked at Angela, my cousin, the woman whose life was stolen and now, finally, returned. I turned back to the camera, my voice clear and steady. My grandfather taught me that a legacy isn't the name you inherit. It's the one you choose to honor. Today, we honored the name of Rosemary Vance. Her story will not be buried any longer. The real work of the Vance legacy starts now. I took Angela's arm, and together, the two of us walked down the steps, leaving the wreckage of the old world behind and stepping into the light of a new one. We didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, we would face it as family.